Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a frontline update for the 9th of March 2023. Hello team, where should we go to first? Well, of course, the northeast sector of the Ukraine map. So the Kupiansk to Svatva to Kremina front line. And in all reality, hardly anything of note in this entire axis. The Ukrainians have had a repelled probing attack uh, repelled by the Russians in Hranikivka. So this is an area that we've seen quite a bit of activity over the last few weeks, but not too much detail other than that. And then just a few places on the way down to Kremina, as we can see from the ISW daily report. Russian unsuccessful operations near Nevska, Shpirna, which is south of Kremna, Hranikivka, Vimka, Fedorivka, which is near Bakhmut, so all over the shop here. Kuzumivka, Novoselivska, and some unspecified advances towards Kurovsk. I cannot find that Kurovsk, which is apparently 17 kilometers west of Kremina, and attacks towards Nevska and Makivka as well, and Bilorivka. So let's put all of those on a map. Basically, there are the usual claims from the Russians that there are, and from the Ukrainians, that there are attacks near Kuzumivka, Stelamakivka. Nevska is on the map in the news quite a bit towards here, and Makivka, that's from Ploshchanka, Chivona Pivka area. I showed you some footage yesterday of an attack in the fields there, and a little bit of gained territory for the Russians, and supposedly some kind of unspecified gain for the Russians going towards this Zorovska. I have no idea where that is, Zorovka, or some such place. Sorry, Kirovsk. Words. Somewhere around there. Just to remind you, place names, I was like looking earlier at the map, and Dubrova. Just, my goodness, Ukraine, you are trying to confuse me with all these similar names, or same names, different places. Bilorivka being one of them. So Bilorivka there, and down past Shpirna, where there is some activity around Shpirna, to the other Bilorivka. And then we come on towards our Bakhmut sector. There, as I say, not really a lot to report. The whole line from Kupiansk really down to kind of Bilorivka and Shpirna here. So incredibly quiet day, and that's reflected. But when I say quiet, it doesn't mean there isn't fighting, but there's no particular news. And in fact, the figures I reported in the news segment this morning showed quite a big downtick in terms of Russian troops lost. In fact, half of what it was just a couple of days ago, give or take. So that would signify that things are quieter on the front lines. So let's survey what the sources say. Bakhmut is down here. We're going to be concentrating on this sort of northern area first. NEL reports pro-Ukrainian. Source says north of Solidar, Russian forces have relaunched an offensive towards Rozdalivka after further advances towards Seversk were halted earlier at this point by Ukrainian troops. So far, no territorial gains have been reported from either side. We are waiting for confirmation. So this is this area here, Rozdalivka, just north towards Seversk. That is according to no reports, and actually, well, I'll come to that in a second. If we go back to no reports, who then says north of Bakhmut, here we are, north of Bakhmut, Russian forces are now trying to attack from Bakivka towards Hirivka and Bodanivka axis. Russian troops have advanced slightly towards Hirivka. It is suspected that they want to stretch the front north of Kromova to spread Ukrainian troops. The Russians have entered Dubovo Vasilivka. Okay, and that's quite significant. So I'll mention that in a little bit more detail. So Zalizhnensky here, along this road, there's Orikovo, Vasilivka, and here Bakivka through to Hirivka. Okay, so that's in this area here. There are some claims that the Russians have entered Dubovo Vasilivka. I had this as Russian, then not, then now I do. Differing claims as to whether Russia are in control of Dubovo Vasilivka, and some Ukrainian sources are now saying, yeah, it might be happening. But basically, there seems to be a little bit of an uptick in this northwestern area of the Bakhmut sector, as according to ISW. So let's read through what they've said. So the general staff, the Ukrainians have said unsuccessful attacks near Bakivka, Dubova, Vasilivka, Orikovo, Vasilivka, and Bodanivka, as well as within 6 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut near Ivanivska and Klishchivka. So they're saying that the general staff is saying Ukrainians are repelling these attacks. Russians haven't taken any land. A Russian mill blogger has claimed that Wagner Group fighters advanced towards Zalizhnensky and Hiroivka. Geolocated footage published on March the 8th indicates that Russian forces have likely advanced closer to a section of the T0504 highway in southwestern Bakhmut. Okay, so ISW a little bit all over the place here. So that's to say the Russian mill bloggers are claiming some advances up here in Zalizhnensky, but also some advances towards the T0504 highway somewhere around here. But then ISW go on to say some contradictory statements, or at least sources are contradicting other sources, and ISW immediately reporting on that. So let's continue. Russian mill bloggers have claimed on March the 7th that Russian forces are interdicting all remaining Ukrainian ground lines of communication, GLOCs, or main supply routes, into Bakhmut, including country roads between Chaziv Yar, which is west of Bakhmut, and Kromova, which is also just sort of northwest of Bakhmut. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted counterattacks near Ivanivska and towards Klishchivka, southwest of Bakhmut. So there are So while they said the Russians have got closer to this T0504, they're also saying there were counterattacks towards Klishchivka and southwest, indeed, of Bakhmut. So where were we? The Ukrainian General Staff's reporting of Russian offensive actions near Klishchivka, a settlement Russian forces have controlled since at least early January 2023, may indicate that Ukrainian forces have pushed Russian forces further away from the highway, which then goes against what they have likely advanced closer to a section. So, and it depends where you're talking about on that highway. Although ISW has not seen any visual confirmation that Ukrainian forces have done so. So they are being conservative here. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces also advanced towards Stupochki. So this is to say Russians may have advanced towards here. I mean, there's just all sorts of claims going on concerning Bakhmut. Russian forces may be increasing the pace of offensive operations northwest of Bakhmut. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces conducted more than 30 assaults near Orikovo, Vasilivka, roughly 30% of the total Russian offensive operations that the General Staff reported in Ukraine on March the 8th. 30% of the offensive operations that the General Staff reported in Ukraine were here. I mean, this is incredible. So they really are trying to take these areas to the northwest. Now, as I mentioned in the news piece, the Russians have increased their front line here from 30 kilometers to 60 kilometers, what with all of the advances they have made. And this means that they will be spreading their troops thinner, but they're obviously trying to do something concerted to the northwest. And what the reasons for that could be, well, the RSWG have a little think about it. So Russian forces may be increasing the pace of offensive operations north there. So prominent Russian mill bloggers are increasingly discussing the possibility of Ukrainian counteroffensives in the Bakhmut area, with some referencing Minkivka as a potential area where Ukrainian forces may start these operations. Minkivka is here up to just along the E40, this or M03 road here out of Pidorodny, really, out of northern Bakhmut. And then Mikivka, this could be the staging ground for a counteroffensive. Russian forces may be conducting a high pace of operations well northwest of Bakhmut to spoil future Ukrainian counterattacks that could relieve pressure on Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. So this might be an offensive, an attempt to really gain a lot of ground here to spoil future counterattacks from the Ukrainians. Attack is the best form of defense type thing. So there is a lot of activity to the northwest here. I have shown some gains for the Russians in this area, particularly around here, this sort of tree line, bunch of forest, and it looks like that could be sort of a bit of a waterway going there. So around there, they have made some gains, and towards Zalizhnensky a little bit as well. Some gains are well, in fact, I'll show you on Syriac maps here. You have it there. They're the gains they've had, and further down south, they've got now Dubovo Vasilivka in under control of the Russians. They had changed their maps yesterday, and now they've given it again. So I do have that, but it may well be that that is a grey zone and is contested. Syriac maps also have gains in the north here, but I already had those gains, so you snooze, you lose. So I've not changed my map around there, and the Russians have made some gains according again to Syriac maps here with a couple of roads just around here and a little bit north and northwest of this reservoir here, or this pond to the south of Bakhmut. So I'm not quite sure what to make of exactly what's going on in Bakhmut and what the Ukrainians are trying to do, whether they are still whether they are carrying out an operational withdrawal or whether they are reinforcing Bakhmut, whether they are looking for a counter-attack. I don't know. I don't think that the last 24 hours has told us anything particular on that front. No report says today footage reconfirmed our initial report that Ukraine still controls the Kremova crossing. Despite having blown up the regular road, the Ukrainians created an alternative passage north of Opitny. Russians are pushing. The same goes for Bakhmut cemetery area. No changes on the map so far. I did change a little bit of mapping around here where I think they have successfully pushed. But yeah, pressure as you would expect all around Bakhmut really. But they are still able, it seems, to use these routes out of Bakhmut, even though the Russians do claim that they have fire control over them all. There's some footage of, it appears, probably the mud roads in the middle here of Ukrainians moving out of there, and there being quite a graveyard of equipment, not necessarily entirely military, a lot of civilian equipment being used by the military that has been hit. So there's quite a lot of equipment in, I presume, in this general area that the Ukrainians have lost over the course of the really the battle for Bakhmut. So that could have been not just this last week, but over the last few months. Depends how long the Russians have been able to have some kind of fire control over this area there. Okay, let's move on south from Bakhmut. As we come down past New York, Sumy, Donetsk, we come on to this northern area and Krasnohorivka. We've got Avdivka, northern area of Avdivka, and the south, Vodyany, Opitny towards Siverny. Again, here, just like really Mariinka and Bakhmut, the Ukrainians are concentrating less on doing full frontal assaults and trying to take it to the north and to the south. There are claims that they now control Vesele, which is around here. I don't think it's always marked on the map. It might even be this settlement, which I've already got them controlling, and are trying to take Krasnohorivka here. The ISW says the Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces conducted more than 20 offensive assaults near Mariinka, so that's going down south to Mariinka, roughly a fifth of the total Russian offensive operations that the General Staff reported in Ukraine. So Mariinka and then just northwest of Bakhmut have basically got like half of all the activity along the whole front line. Now, this is the reason I bring Mariinka into to talk about already without having got there is this analysis here. Russian forces have increased their tempo of offensive operations north of Avdivka in recent weeks, likely as part of a tactical shift similar to changing Russian tactics in assaults on Mariinka. Russian forces have increasingly sought to, in recent weeks, to pressure Ukrainian forces to leave Mariinka through assaults on the north and the south of the settlement instead of continuing costly frontal assaults on heavily defended Ukrainian positions. Russian forces do not currently have the necessary combat power in the Avdivka area to advance on Avdivka from the north and south, and are currently unlikely to do so unless they deploy significant reinforcements to the area. But they are certainly trying it. I mean, they are putting the effort here into Krasnohorivka and to Vodyany as well, and coming south here towards Tonenke via Siverny. So there is definitely their intention here is to do kind of what they're doing in Bakhmut and indeed in Mariinka. Defmon says, Avdiivka, you Russians have made some progress the last few weeks in this direction. I think it's very likely this will be the next focus after Bakhmut for the Russians. The Ukrainian defenses in this area have been shelled for 8 years or so. It's amazing they still hold. I advise you watch the 93rd. It's a 3-part documentary series that you can get on YouTube. There's a dubbed and subtitled version, which will give you an indication of, how much war has been taking place around this area, around Donetsk. Anyway, as you can see here, there is, according to Defmon, the Russians have made some advances in that northern area and indeed along this southern area too. So they have been closing that net in on Avdiivka very, very slowly, but it's still an incremental movement forward. And you could argue slowly wins a race. The Russians are plodding on at a great cost, but they are taking territory in places from the Ukrainians. And the same could be said as well for Mariinka. I'm not sure there's any other news of territorial changes in Mariinka, just that they appear to be doing the same kind of thing. Indeed, as Defmon just merely says, Ukrainians repulsed attacks near Mariinka, Novomykhailivka, and the Russians continue to attack at Vuhledar. Indeed, on Defmon's map, there is that territory in the Dacha area to the southeast of Vuhledar that he thinks that the Russians control. I haven't changed mine since changing it from what Andrew Perpetua said. So not much going on in Mariinka. There could be minor gains for the Russians, but really not a lot to write home about. I've got this, looks like the neck of a bird. Defmon has more of a large-scale area being controlled by the Russians, but no particular news coming from there. So as we come out of Vuhledar, I mean, really, there isn't much to be said. As I say, it seems relatively quiet along the front lines, other than 50% of those attacks are in the in just north of Avdiivka. Oh no, sorry, Mariinka and northwest of Bakhmut. So yeah, everywhere else fairly quiet. So in the Zaporizhia Oblast, you've got Enerhodar, which has the nuclear power plant. Just to mention, and I did mention that something was hit around there. Russian sources claimed on March 8th that Ukrainian forces conducted a drone strike against Enerhodar, Zaporizhia Oblast, starting a fire in a field. Russian sources claim that the fire spread over 4 hectares of land, threatening a power line that supports Enerhodar and local infrastructure. It'd be odd in wintertime for 4 hectares of field to go up in fire, so that seems rather bizarre. And I did see some smoking coming from buildings in that region, as according to my news update this morning. So I'm not sure that's a correct representation of what happened, but I'm not wholly sure. And then we move to the Dnipro River in Kherson. So Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces landed on a Dnipro River Delta islands for the 3rd consecutive day on March 8th. The Russian sources claimed on the 8th that Russian forces fired on Ukrainian positions on the Dnipro River Delta islands and that positional battles are ongoing on the island. Ukraine's Southern Operational Command reported on March 7th that Ukrainian forces destroyed a Russian ammunition depot on Veliky Potemkin Island, southwest of Kherson City. So let's just pop over there now. If we come to, if my mouse actually worked, come down to the area we are talking about. This is the Dnipro. And just around Kherson, there are a number of islands in the delta that are the source of quite a lot of military activity at the moment. Indeed, War Monitor here says Ukrainian artillery hit a Russian ammunition depot in Kardashianka across the Dnipro River Delta. So this is the island that there's quite a lot of activity on. You see the white areas are the settlements. There's quite a lot of buildings on there. These aren't just marshy islands without settlements on. And here's the ammunition depot there, which will be somewhere around here. That was hit, and really the only other thing to say is just to pop back and just pop into Rebar because I forgot to mention Rebar in when I was talking about Bakhmut, just to see what they have to say. They've only got not too much on Bakhmut today. The Battle of Bakhmut, the Solidar area, you can see that they have gains to the northwest for the Russians around here. They have Dubovo Vasilivka under their control, and pressure on the east, taking the east. So we'll see what they have to say. Prigozhin, the founder of Wagner, announced the liberation of the entire eastern part of Bakhmut. Everything east of Bakhmutivka River is under Russian control, yes. Fighting also continues on the southern outskirts of the city near Independence Street, as well as the southwest near Liznoye Cooperative and the MiG-17 monument. So there's this airplane monument that, rather like the tank monument in the east, is quite significant, and would be a bit of a PR stunt if they could have their troops on that. Ukrainian command continues to partially withdraw troops from Bakhmut along the dirt roads under constant artillery shelling and airstrikes. Ukrainian assault units continued counterattacks to keep the ground corridor open from Bakhmut to Chazivya and Konstantinivka. Additional fortifications have been created in the vicinity of Nikiforovka and Minkivka. That was the area where they are thinking, the Russians are thinking the Ukrainians could launch a counter attack from. Ditches and trenches have been dug. Construction materials are delivered daily in the area of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. So the Ukrainians are doing a lot of trench digging. There's quite a bit of footage to suggest that is taking place all around Bakhmut. But that I just thought I'd throw that in because I forgot to reference Rebar. But as you can see, not an awful lot of information coming from Rebar as well. Just quite a quiet day on the front. But it's mainly about the missile attacks that took place overnight last night. And go and check my news video out to get more detail on that. And the Kinzhal, the Dagger missiles, the hypersonic ballistic missiles that Russia brought to bear against Ukraine. Anyway, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. Sorry, today's a bit all over the place. My brain is not quite with it. But thanks anyway. And I'll speak to you later.